right, so let's get started. Welcome. I'm Divya. I'm a data science consultant and educator as well. So I'm super excited to be sharing one of my recent projects, knowledge graphs on femicide cases using Hong Kong legal databases, which was done in collaboration with Dr. Hawa Dayan and Dr. Vidya Raman. So let me just a bit of a caution before we get jump started into the content. This presentation does contain content related to homicide and specifically femicide, where the victims are females. So viewer discretion is advised because of its sensitive nature. So this will be the agenda for today's presentation. So it just fits nicely in because the last speaker essentially talked about knowledge graph, and I have a great application for it. So I always like to start with the motivation for any project. So this is an interdisciplinary project which combines the area of generative AI, which is basically natural language processing, and then criminology, and of course, graph database. This happened a few years back when I worked with, I happened to meet Professor Hawa, who is a professor of criminology from the University of Haifa. She at that time was spending some time as a research professor here in Singapore, and she was extracting criminological information from cases from judicial texts. Since I was working on extracting information from minutes of meeting for some internal compliance problems, I was very curious to understand how NLP would work. So here is a sort of evolution of how things went. So at a very high level, the problem statement is extraction of information from the Hong Kong legal verdicts, which are available at the Hong Kong Legal Information Institutes. So what were the information of interest to us? They could be umbrellaed into three categories. So features about the crime itself, features about the victim, and features of the killer. Here, of course, the legal verdicts are the unstructured text. As we went along, I was also interested to extract a few additional entities from these, such as the verdict, the timeline of events, etc. We'll talk more about it. So diving a little deeper into what were the informations of interest. So the features of crime, the criminological features that Professor Dayan was interested was basically the date of crime, of course, murder weapon, motive of murder, etc. But also if there was any overkilling or more than one people were wounded as part of this incident. And features of victim included demographic information about the victim, and also if they were related to the suspect, right? And if they were related, what was the relationship? And then for killers, specifically, of course, demographic information, but also additionally, if the killer was under the influence of drugs or were they chronically ill or was there financial trouble, right? And prior criminal record as well. And of course, did the killer commit suicide at the end of the incident as well. So at that time, which was like the pre-pandemic days, I sort of structured this information retrieval into NLP tasks, natural language processing. So if you sort of are in the field, NLP is where you have multiple tasks. So one is the named entity recognition, where it extracts names, location, age, etc. So some could be extracted from that bucket. Another task is a question answer task, very similar to how we do our comprehension. So given a context, ask questions and train your model to get answers. It can be an extractive answer or an abstractive answer, right? So all of the marital status, and if there were substance abuse, etc. I used question answers to extract these information. And then, so some of these required if the killer had prior criminal record, right? So it was a yes or no question. So this does require some deductive reasoning. So I put them all into Boolean Q&A. So this is the three NLP tasks with which I tried. But of course, these were some of my key learnings. This was, again, a few years back. So judicial verdicts are pretty complex documents. They vary in length and the structure. There was definitely some success in extracting information, but it wasn't consistent, right? So, for example, named entity recognition, not just extracted victim and killer's information, but also other people mentioned, like the witnesses or policemen, etc. And the bool queue, which is for Boolean question answer, was not very consistent, especially because of the structure of the verdict itself. So, of course, there wasn't enough label data to train these multiple models at that time. So I shelved this project for a while. And then recently, with the resurgence of NLP with all these large language models, especially GPT, so I decided to dust it off and wanted, because I was doing prompt engineering for another project of mine. So you can see that all of these can actually be fit as question answer with context, which is where GPT works really well, right? So all of these tasks were created as prompt engineering tasks. So I'll quickly deep dive into some of the learnings from the prompt engineering as I did, and also show you the prompts. So in this use case, the context was the judicial verdict, which was web scraped, right? And then the prompt itself was straightforward with the mention of the judicial context. Of course, in some cases, I had to clarify, look for killer or the defendant information, because that is how it was mentioned in the verdict. For deductive reasoning questions, it did a very good job, unlike earlier Bull Q. But the prompts needed to be updated to either say yes, no, or unknown, because one of the problems with Gen AI is it also can hallucinate, right? So sometimes after validating the results, I realized that I needed to explicitly say that, hey, if this is not present in the context, please say unknown. When the judicial verdicts were too long, output would be truncated, which was what also the earlier speaker was talking about. So it would just plain get rejected. So we had to split these prompts, not all at one go, right? And also so we created like 3 different prompts for extracting information of victim, killer, and crime. All of these are results from GPT 3.5 from OpenAI. The outputs of these prompts were verified because I had label data from Professor Dayan, so through manual validation. So let's look into each of these prompts itself. So I wanted to highlight, I don't have the entire text in here, but because of space constraints, but I can highlight some of it for the killer extracting information. We wanted to extract name, age, origin of the killer, etc. But for example, whether the killer was chronically ill, right? So there was one Boolean feature like is ill to return yes, no, or unknown. And we also asked generative AI as a checker to extract the list of key phrases from the verdict text that describe the health of the suspect. So this, if you look at some of the prompt engineering practices, this is one way in which you can ask the Gen AI to verify the answer it's actually giving us, right? So the same with sort of motive of the murder, like what were some of the motive indicators. And when I verified it, it was very, very, it was picking up these 3 phrases from which it was actually answering that question. And the format of the output was in JSON format. I think one of the earlier questions in the session was, how do we extract this structure, right? So Gen AI understands JSON. There were initially some problems with extracting JSON, but most often you can like correct it with very minimal post-processing effort. So I will just skip through the prompt of victim. Here again, mostly the relationship and are they related, and what is the kind of relationship. And then crime, we were interested in date and location, and also was it performed, did the incident happen in a remote location, right? Etc. And were more than one person killed or wounded, and also indicators for that, so that we could counter verify. So we also wanted to understand, because in some of the verdicts, there were a whole sense of events, so wanted to look at how do we understand the date and timeline. So we were also able to extract the date and the event that occurred in this regard. Right. So it was pretty good when you asked for timeline. So if you just asked for timeline, it gave you the story. But if you asked timelines with date and event, it was able to extract. But of course, not exactly in the chronological order, but in the order it came in the verdict. So then we used all of the information to load into a knowledge graph, because that was a great way to visualize. So top 3 nodes were case, alias the crime attributes of it, then the victim, the attributes, and suspect. So the case was connected to victim as committed on the victim and committed by the suspect. And if there existed a relationship, the victim and suspect were connected. So let me just give a very quick demo. So I'll stop sharing screen and go into sharing my Neo4j graph. So you can see this is my graph. So here you can see the nodes, case, suspect, and victim. So I'll just blow it up a little bit so that you can all see it. So you can see that this case, right, so it was committed on, and so this is committed at. So I also included location later on, then committed by. So there isn't a relationship that exists between the victim and the suspect. But here, if you look at it, so this is committed on the victim, and you can see there is a relationship that exists, right? So later, in order to understand and study some of these properties, I also created a category node so that I can also understand prior criminal record or where there are financial problems, etc. So let me just quickly show you a cipher, especially because if you read the original paper by Professor Dhawan, you will realize that a lot of femicide happened by within the family. So I've just extracted the gender of the suspect and the relationship type, right? So you can see that the relation, there is cases of the sons murdering the mothers and the husbands murdering their wife as well. So the sons murdering, which I later understood it was called matricide, killing of one's mother. So so you can see here I've also used a few to look for, hey, what are some of the nodes which are connected to some categories. So let's move on with the presentation. I just wanted to quickly okay, so what do we do with this? Of course, it can be used for investigative and criminal analysis at the bottom of the pyramid. But also, if we look at it and if we think about fusing this with a lot of investigative information, it can actually be used at administrative levels for policy makers as well, right? Because it gives you unique context. Okay, so now with this, we were able to extract, because we had a subject matter expert, so we were able to get the entity of interest, get prompts for it. So it got us curious to understand, hey, can we, if it is unstructured data of a domain which we don't understand, how can we extract these entities of interest? So we went on to create what we call auto or iterative prompting. This is, again, our own christening, right? So I wanted to just walk you through the process. So we submitted the verdict to let GenAI give us what is the topic. And then giving the topic, we've asked it to generate a schema for the topic, right? So here, of course, it because it was a legal verdict, it look at all the case information, etc. And then later, we submitted for a specific case and asked it to extract information of interest. And this with a few cycles. But what we found was it was not as good as having a subject matter experts, right? So prompt engineering definitely helps us greatly with information extraction, better than the previous pipeline of NLP tasks. But in the absence of subject matter experts, iterative or auto prompting is a very initial starting point, but it gets very difficult, especially with respect to the domain. So we are not there yet with regard to extracting knowledge graph, which might make sense to domain experts, right? So I feel that still we need human intervention there. Of course, now because of OpenAI, there is limitation on the length of the context as well. So which can be solved by going around these engineering techniques like splitting your prompts, etc. So as a researcher, it's always good to leave with some future work. So we want to extend this work to the New Zealand legal data set. And specifically, this time, we have just loaded it into Neo4j for visualization and done some preliminary cipher queries to understand the data. But it is also about trying to create these graph embeddings so that we can retrieve similar cases, crime cases where victims or your suspect have certain similar properties. And of course, we can see some of the application, because I also work in HR tech, how we can extend the knowledge graph to probably a resume, right? So that you can give a view to the recruiter as well on some of the information of interest extracted from these resumes and see connections between the resumes as well. All right, so here is a list of references, including the publication from which we extracted all of the criminal information, right? And the code for this project as well, which I will post it in the session link later. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope, please do keep in touch for any collaborative work. So let me stop sharing so that I can see if there are any questions.